buonasera a tutte e a tutti. È un piacere veramente aprire questa sessione del nostro seminario su Roman Republic e presentarvi una relatrice che non ha bisogno di presentazioni ovviamente, ma comunque giusto per dire due parole veloci su di lei. Marta García Morcillo insegna Ancient History di Roehampton University in London e tra i suoi numerosissimi interessi di ricerca si segnala in particolare un grosso filone di studi sull'economia romana, con particolare attenzione al rapporto tra le attività finanziarie e i commerci nel Mediterraneo. Poi ha sviluppato anche un notevole interesse sulla ricezione del mondo antico in vari media, sia visuali che non visuali, letterari, culturali, e tra appunto le sue attività è co-editor della bellissima collana Romescapes, dedicata appunto ai luoghi fisici, agli spazi fisici di Roma, analizzati in maniera diacronica. E vorrei menzionare soltanto l'ultima monografia tra i numerosi lavori che ha fatto. L'ultima monografia appena uscita da pochissimo, pubblicata insieme a Cristina Rosillo, sul Managing Information in the Roman Economy, cioè una monografia estremamente innovativa perché ha analizzato il ruolo dell'informazione nei rapporti economici, quindi analizza l'informazione come una risorsa economica. In effetti il monopolio dell'informazione era fondamentale per lo sviluppo dei rapporti contrattuali e appunto nel capire come funzionava nel mondo antico è un approccio secondo me estremamente innovativo che sono convinto, non dico mi auguro, sono convinto che avrà un grandissimo impatto negli studi sull'economia romana dei prossimi anni. Ma lascio subito a lei la parola, appunto la ringrazio per aver accettato di partecipare al nostro seminario.
I'm flattered di questa presentazione, veramente che non merito per niente, e volevo soltanto ringraziare Mattia e Federico per questa invitazione, che per me è un gran piacere, anche un onore e una gran responsabilità anche. A responsibility, and I change now to English, because of course I don't consider myself to be a researcher in the Roman Republic, but somehow in the last years I have developed this interest because of course, in particular because there is an author that you cannot avoid if you work on Roman economy, if you work on Roman economic mentality and Roman financial history, and that Cicero, that author is of course Cicero. So my interest in the Officiis, and I'm trying to share now the PowerPoint, okay, rises actually some years ago when I was working on my PhD, which was about Roman auctions, and I was really interested in this work because it gave us some clues, about the how actually economic activity was inserted in some sort of social system of moral system. And this moral system, of course, is explained in an amazing detail in this absolutely fundamental work for the economic history, but of course for the history of philosophy and for the development of philosophy and the influence, among others, of course, of Stoicism and in economic ideas and its translation in economic ideas. Now, the project that I'm presenting is a work in progress pretty much. I'm in a very, very, very preliminary stage of this research. And it's important to mention that it's part of a bigger project, a project supported by the HRC and the German Research Council, the DFG, called Twisted Transfers, Constructions, no, I always forget the second part. It's about the discursive constructions of corruption in ancient Greece and Rome. And my commitment and my aim within this project is specifically to investigate the notion of twisted trade or trade economic activities that not necessarily were labeled as illegal, but were certainly considered within some ambiguous or in a very ambiguous way in categories, negative categories linked with immorality. Sometimes, of course, and I'm particularly interested in these gray zones between and the different perspectives over the same practice, the same act, and how everything can be interpreted in different ways. So this is beyond illegalities. And of course, the Officiis is very, very, very important, as I mentioned, for the understanding of the development of the history of financial thinking, but also economic thinking. So after this big introduction, I'd like to show you my next slide. Let's see if I can manage to. Which is this, that if my face for any reason is covering any of this important text, let me know. This, as you can see, this is not mine. I have extracted this from a website. So I was looking for ideas on value. So I'm going to talk, I didn't mention it, I'm going to talk about value, yeah, the concept of value. Because the concept of value is a very, very, very tricky, very elusive idea. When we ask what we think about or something is valuable, something is not, you can express this in many different ways, from a social perspective, cultural perspective, economic perspective. Now, I'm of course interested in this economic perspective, but even though this posed me with some really, really very difficult situations. And one of them is, of course, what is value today? So I went to one of these so great and multinational financial institutions, in this case, the bank ING, and I found that they have a description of what for them value is. So when we read this, and I can read it loud just to emphasize it, yeah? As a global bank, we bring more to society than just our financial value. Value is created through our business model, where we transform various inputs or capitals through business activities and interactions to produce outputs and outcomes that create value over the short, medium, or long term. Our value creation model is a simplified way of showing how we create value for and with our stakeholders. Now, let me ask you, what do you understand under value after reading this? It's a rhetorical question, but you can answer if you want. So, of course, if you're an expert in modern finances, you say, this is very clear what value is. It's not, it's clearly not. I, as a historian, even if I'm interested in economic matters, I see it as a conundrum of ideas that are quite, let's put it in a way, self-contained. So, and that, of course, explains that they're explained by themselves. So what is value is what this bank does, and what is that? Does it have really a translation into economic productivity, or it remains within this sort of conundrum, which is financial activities and financial products? And of course, when you read all these words, you could also be talking to a certain degree, because we are very used to these concepts, and we also use them in other contexts, for instance, in the academic context as well. No? We all do outputs and we search for incomes and etc. But it says something that is not understandable. Certainly not understandable for the common customer, perhaps not the big investor, but the common customer of this bank. And of course, this is all surrounded by a series of visual ideas, among them this one that illustrates very nicely the website where this is located, in which you don't see much of this so economic ideas behind, but everything is social, cultural. But the idea itself of value is very, very, very elusive. So what is value? Value is a quite polysemic and very elusive and malleable concept. In a sense, the notion of value helps us, everyone, articulate individual and collective choices, preferences, beliefs, and emotions. Value is a social construct, a convention that arises as the outcome of a progress of negotiation. Value also operates at different cognitive levels. It can concern the appraisal of objects in the market, but also our personal or collective judgment about things, material or immaterial. Because value resists one-sided definitions, but it still remains an essential notion to understand the framework under which societies are organized, the concept is very dynamic and views can be also manipulated. In economic terms, today, so for instance, it's not the same it's not the same thing, value is not the same thing as, for instance, at the beginning of the 20th century, during this Industrial Revolution, or during the Enlightenment. So when we think about value, we need to be very cautious, of course, about the applicability of this concept in other historical periods and in other economic systems. Now, I became very interested in this very famous book by Mariana Mazzucato, The Value of Everything. And it is from here where I took actually the title of the current papers, not publicities, but it is really a great book. So Making and Taking in the Global Economy, The Value of Everything. This book was published in 2019 by the economist Mariana Mazzucato and offers a critical view of how value has become actually a subjective category that we simply have to stop questioning. The concept of value changes, as I said, across history and mentalities. And according to Mazzucato, there is the assumption that value is actually today in the eyes of the beholder. And there is a lack of questioning of such assumption. According to Mazzucato, the criteria used today to decide if an activity is value creating or not is very, very, very thin. So we measure value by whether it earns income. So, and the quote is very clear about that. You earn income because you are productive, and you are productive because you earn income. Circular arguments that wipes out the idea of an earned income. The idea of the distinction between productive and unproductive activities is used rarely discussed today. And in fact, so if we look at what happens from mid-19th century, which is also an aspect that Mazzucato researches, there has been an important shift in the conceptualization of value from being an objective category, that could be, for instance, mercantilism, so Adam Smith's idea of within the, so the importance of trade. According to Marx, of course, labor is value, capital is an equivalent of value, etc., etc. So there has been a shift from different understood as an objective category of value to a more subjective one that is tied to individual preferences. And as a consequence of that, tell us Mazzucato, the production boundary that used to define value, agricultural product of work, labor, products of trade, etc., or industrial products, etc., has blurred. So the financial markets like the ones and corporations like the one we saw before are the perhaps clearest or the most clear example of this subjectivity and ambiguity of the concept of value today. So I became very interested in how to trace this in the past. We know, for instance, Adam Smith, the Wealth of Nations, but also his work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, they both are very feed from the ideas of Cicero and Cicero's the Officiis as well. But how is this actually, how grows in Cicero, these ideas, and how are they received? So I became very interested in that, and also in the relationship between value and the concept of wealth itself. So if we move to Rome, and we have even more problems to find an exact identification between modern concept of value and what we could consider what the ancient Romans understood as a value. If we remain in economic terms, that we can of course always transfer into social and cultural values as well, but this is different. So we remain in the framework of the economy, or social economy, better say. We see that doesn't exist an exact equivalent of the term in Latin. Instead, in matters concerning things submitted to economic judgment and pecuniary considerations, ancient Romans used a large variety of expressions that reveal different notions of value, but also a deep understanding of its functions. Typically, the cost of a property on the market could be defined with expressions like quanti venire possunt, while verum, aequum, and justum pretium designated a general concept of value that attempted, as much as possible, to detach itself from a high degree of instability and fluctuations of market prices, while also seeking to be recognized by the relevant parties as an acceptable and fair price. The judicial valuations or estimationes, by which a judge resolves conflicts of ownership, as well as matters such as the division of properties and the fixing of fines and compensations, thus aspire to become an undisputable verum pretium. Such impartial arbitrations did not overlook other kinds of value, such as the subjective individual appraisal of a thing, quanti mea est, which is very, very common in literature, or the pretium or estimatio ex affectu or affectionis, which express a sentimental value with a difficult monetary translation. So I'm very, very interested in testing value as a concept that helps us better understand how Romans thought and expressed economic preferences, choices, concerns, mentalities, and motivations. Now we move to, finally, to Cicero's De Officiis. Of course, Cicero's De Officiis have been widely, broadly, and deeply studied by remarkable scholars. Let me just mention from Pierre Grimard to Miriam Griffin, Emanuele Narducci, Claudia Motti, etc., etc., etc. So big names and scholars who have become interested not only, of course, in the philosophical learnings of and importance of the work, but also its political importance the contextualization of the work also at the end of Cicero's life and political career, and all the connotations that this work has as a sort of testament in life. Now, I'm not going to, of course, go deeper into that. We just go straight into the concept of value, but let me just contextualize a little bit what the Officiis is. So, as I say, Cicero describes his own work as a testament for life, and in the very role of the paterfamilias, he offers his son, who embodies at this time the future generations, the only hope, perhaps, a rationalized moral framework, a guidance for action based on a balanced system of virtues, which is dominated by principles of social reciprocity. Accordingly, the exchange of acts of kindness and the praxis of giving and receiving are meant to contribute to the general good, so communis utilitates, in harmony with the natural law. The Stoic doctrines of Panaetius guide Cicero's discourse of the need to reconcile the often conflicted relationship between honestas and utilitas. The caseload provided in Book 3 in particular helps illustrate this conflict in situations in which economic profit challenges what is morally right, but also in which the search for the good becomes not an aim by itself, but just a mere instrument to obtain an advantage. An obvious remark, of course, what is morally wrong is not always an illegal act, and this is something important in the work. I would say very, very, very important, very relevant indeed. And this invites to consider the very nature of the act. So Cicero unpacks this problem following Panaetius, I read. First, people question whether the contemplated act is morally right or morally wrong. And in such deliberation, the minds are often led to violent, divergent discussions. Finish the quotation. The possibility of having different views upon the same action leads Panaetius to evaluate the utilitas and the very aims of the action, so the idea of quo bono. The basic idea that helps identify rightful and unrightful self-interested action is the principle that features as an axiom from the natural law throughout the whole book. this is the self-interest, or the idea is that the self-interest should never intentionally harm others. Activities destined to enlarge the property are legitimate, provided they observe this principle of justice and remain restricted to the private sphere. The separation between public and private affairs legitimates Cicero, or Cicero's defense of the right to enlarge the res familiaris, even for those who did not contribute to public life, for instance, by holding an office or become a magistrate. Paneccius' ideas are complemented by Cicero's own exploration of specific examples of wrongdoings provoked by self-profit, and these are specifically unpacked in Book 3. I remain here because I haven't commented the second text. A central factor and theme in Cicero's exploration of the causes of wrongdoings is his particular interest in the use and instrumentalization of knowledge of actions that often escape punishment or that navigate within the gray zones of what is legal and what is not. This is explicitly stated in the following passage, so 373. Let us put our principle to the rest. If you please, and see if holds good, if those instances in which perhaps the world in general finds no wrongs, for in this connection, we do not need to discuss cutthroats, prisoners, forgers of wills, thieves, and embezzlers of public monies, who should be repressed not by lectures and discussions of philosophers, but by chains and prison walls. But let us study here the conduct of those who have the reputation of being honest men. So these are very clear cases that are, of course, interesting for Cicero, but not so interested as those that remain in more so ambiguous zones of morality and corruption as well. So less explicit are the cases that build the central passages of Book 3, which look in detail at the effects of asymmetric information on economic decision and practice. Let me say that this topic is discussed in a collective volume that it was mentioned in the introduction, recently edited by Cristina Rosillo and myself, and with wonderful contributions by others. A typical phenomenon of asymmetric or imperfect information is silence, and more specifically, lying by omission. To illustrate the dialogue between the Stoic philosopher Diogenes of Babylon and Antipater of Tarsus, who was Paneccius' teacher, Cicero introduced a constructed moral dilemma framed by the ideas of scarcity and need. This is a very, very, very famous passage of the work, and still very, very important, so it is worth commenting it and go through this. I quote, suppose, for example, a time of death and famine at Rhodes, which provisions at fabulous prices. And suppose that a honest man, Bonus, has imported a large cargo of grain from Alexandria, and that to his central knowledge, also several other importers have set sail from Alexandria, and that on the voyage, he has sighted their vessels laden grain and bound for Rhodes. Is he to report the fact that to the Rhodians, or is he to keep his own counsel and sell his own stock at the highest market price? I am assuming the case of a virtuous, upright, and I am raising the question how a man will think and reason who will not conceal the facts from the Rhodians if he thought that it was immoral to do so. But who may be in doubt whether such silence will really be immoral? So, end of the quotation. The exclusive use of information here by the seller and its hiding from the buyer is unambiguously condemned by Antipater, while Diogenes holds a very different view, as typical in these dialogues are. I read, according to Antipater, all the facts should be disclosed, that the buyer may not be informed of any detail that the seller knows. According to Diogenes, the seller should declare any defects in his wares. In so, insofar as such a course is prescribed by the common law of the land. But for the rest, since he has goods to sell, he may try to sell them to the best possible advantage, provided he is guilty of no misrepresentation. And then it follows, I have imported my stock, Diogenes, merchants will say. I have offered it for sale. I sell at a price no higher than my competitors, perhaps even lower when the market is. Who is wrong? Now, that's my words. Diogenes' reasoning justifies the fairness of a price setting that follows the logic and economic competition within a market of scarcity. The price of Diogenes' seller is fair in comparison to others, regardless of the fact that the process that led to it was far from being transparent. So as you can see, despite the historical and cultural distance, this self-contained logic is not that far, after all, from those of the credos that sustain the idea of licit profit in modern capitalistic free market societies, and particularly within the context of the financial market. So think about the price, and that quotation by Mazzucato, the thing that tells us that the price by itself defines the value of something, and use also the judgment of what is fair and what is not. So it's an interesting echo. Antipater's answer deviates clearly from this argument. And I thought, what say you? Comes Antipater's argument on the other side. It is your duty to consider the interests of your fellow man and to serve society. You were brought into the world under these conditions and have these inborn principles which you are in duty bound to obey and follow. That your interest shall be the interest in the community, and conversely, that the interest of the community shall be your interest as well. Will you, in view of all these facts, conceal from your fellow men that relief is plenteous supplies, is close at hand for them? I don't know why I read Antipater as an angry man. He was angry in the dialogue. So Diogenes' reply in the next passage insists on the moral difference between concealing, so calere, and not revealing. So there is an important difference according to him here. It is one thing to conceal, Diogenes will perhaps reply. Not to reveal is quite a different thing. At this present moment, I'm not concealing from you, even if I'm not revealing to you, the nature of the goods or the highest good. And to know this secret will be of more advantage to you than to know that the price of wheat was down. But I am under no obligation to tell you everything that it may be to your interest to be told. End of the quotation. Antipater reminds Diogenes next, using the same expression, necesse est, which is repeated in both, of the obligation that brings together men in society. Yeah, Antipater will say, but you are obliged, necesse est, as you must admit, if you will only bethink you on the bonds of fellowship forged by nature and existing between man and man. The Panaetian dialogue concludes with Diogenes' critical defense of private ownership. I do not forget them, the other will reply, but do you mean to say that those bonds of fellowship are such that there is no such a thing as private property? If that's the case, we should not sell anything at all, but freely give everything away. So predates of a sort of communism here. It is at this point quite clear to the ancient and modern reader that neither Antipater nor Panaetius, nor Cicero himself question any rights to possess or transfer goods and properties. The problem is entirely moral. But what is important here is that this morality directly informs the function of the individual within the collective structure of society. The constructed case of the Rhodian grain dealers is, of course, a very, very clear example of a scarcity market, or why not as well, a scarcity marketing that speculates with the scarcity of a product in order to increase demand and prices. The consequences of omitting information are, in this specific case, very dramatic. In fact, a matter of life and death, collective, so not just individually. Less dramatic, of course, but certainly important to strengthen Cicero's argument of the need to observe the interest of others are provided in the next passages. The intentional omission of defects in the real estate market and in the sale of slaves are discussed next by Cicero, with the aim of confronting his audience with a very common problem that affected business transactions between individuals. I am not going to scrutinize these specific passages that are very well studied and have been also the focus of recent research about the impact of hidden information and market transactions, and on the strategies such as signaling, which aim to mitigate the problem of adverse selection. So in fact, let me mention Cristina Rosillo, who has recently worked on this in the case of the sale of sales in the real estate market, and Miles Lavan, who has done also the same in the case of the slave market, using this text and others also complemented by legal sources as well. So even if, as Cicero recalls, these wrongdoings and trickeries regarding hidden information were regulated by law, which was itself inspired by natural law, and are well documented in the edilician regulations, in the digest, for instance, the author insists that something that can be right according to moral law can be also forbidden by moral law. Cicero's conclusion on this law is to illustrate it. From this, we come to realize that
I'm sorry, do you have any problem?
Is a source of right.
Marta, we missed the last 50 seconds or so.
We have some problem hearing
It is not in accord with.
Maybe stop the screen sharing, probably. Okay.
Okay, I don't know how long I have been away and talking.
15 seconds, yeah.
A minute.
Okay.
A minute.
Let me ask you something before I continue. Was the audio coming through okay during until I disappear, or it was like interrupting that? Because
no,
I could just remove the video.
Just fine until about a minute ago.
Let me know if something like that happens, that the audio doesn't come through well. Just let me know immediately, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I share again. And try to find out where we were. Was the last, I think. Is this the last? Yeah. Okay. No, I think that was the text. I think. Yeah. And I read it already. I think I read it. I'm not sure. I give it as read. So the text on the conclusions. I'm not sure. Okay, I do it again. Conclusions by Cicero on this argument. From these, we come to realize that since nature is the sort of right, it is not in accord with nature that anyone should take advantage of the other's ignorance. And no greater curse in life can be found than knavery that wears the mask of wisdom. Thence come those countless cases in which the expedient, the utilitas, seems to conflict with the right. For how few will be found who can refrain from wrongdoing if assumed of the power to keep it in absolute secret and to run no risk of punishment. Less obvious cases of moral wrongdoings leave the door open for more ambiguous interpretations than these ones that we just saw. This is the case, for instance, of generosity or liberalitas, both in the private and in the public sphere. These acts address the question of the purpose of such transfers and the very essence of the principle of reciprocity, from self-interested gifts to the formula do ut des and pure altruism. But even there, some nuances need to be observed. Cicero makes clear that nobody should sacrifice their own utilities and surrender to others what they need for themselves, provided no harm
There are again audio problems.
To others. Benefits.
Excuse me, Marta. Excuse me. I have audio problems also again.
Principle of justice. Okay. I'm going to hope nobody. Now, I'm trying to. Okay. No.
I'm afraid it is the screen sharing the problem.
Marta, I wonder whether it's prudent to go for a radical solution and just turn off your video, which I know is
That's
hard.
what I'm trying to do. Yeah. Okay. Here. Okay. I'm going to turn my video, so it will be even more boring. But I hope it works. I hope it works. Yeah. I'm really sorry about that. But can you see the? You cannot see the PowerPoint now.
Well, I can still see the slide actually.
You can see the slide, and yeah, can you? Okay.
There you go.
Let me just. Okay, here we are. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Thank you, really.
Yeah. So we remain, though, in the private sphere. Back to the end of Book 1, Cicero displays in strict order his list of professional occupations. Yeah. I mentioned these two texts that I didn't quite manage to read about this system of gradation system, or is a very clear organized system of professions or economic occupations in which the worst considered other than some workers who dedicated to manual work and work connected with sordid activities. He's concerned about these speculators. So in particular, he mentions the tax collectors and also usurers. Not by chance, because of course these are, even if they are necessary for society, it's something that he doesn't mention, but their condemnation, let's put it in that way, fits into his system, moral system, in which of course productivity, in many senses, is a social productivity and lies elsewhere. And for the same reason, for instance, he's more ambiguous about trade, because, of course, sortita mercatura is not the same as magna mercatura, and trade, provided it is useful, collectively useful, like those traders, grain traders from Rhodes, and actually this text can be directly connected with that one in the third book. Traders, of course, they are absolutely necessary. The more if they are connected, of course, with the productive states of agriculture. He mentions agriculture in a very, 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 that's text 151, in a very, let's put it that way, idealized way, following Cato Dielde, but not even exploring the many nuances of the agriculture, in which Cato Dielde unpacks this idea, but within the context of this new context of expansionist Roman expansion in the Mediterranean and this new large states, productive states. So this is another topic. But Cicero makes it clear that, of course, there should be a connection between agriculture and productive states, I will put it that way, rather than agriculture in general, and, of course, trade. So the text continues with a positive comment about those who invest in agriculture, as I mentioned. But as we can see, Cicero's gradation of economic activities and occupations sweeps an idea of productivity intimately linked with the socially embedded good man, the highest version of the maker. Mercatura remains an ambiguous, not necessarily censorable activity, which depends on the aim of its profit. The part of the takers is comfort, above all, as I mentioned, to the speculators that benefit from the profit of others, the tax collectors, the usurers. I could include here bankers, but not quite, because it's a different category. Even if they are necessary for the system to work, their kind of activity clearly clashes with Cicero's conception of what is valuable and thus honest. So where does actually value lie? So at this point of this accidental presentation, it is quite clear that Cicero's concept of value is a system that balances individual interest and collective good. Beyond Panaetius, actually, Cicero offers a clear scale of value, responsibilities, and obligations to observe that oppose ambiguity and uncertainty. The social community that sustains this system is alluded in the following passages. This is from book 2. I'm going to read it. I quote, "Why should I recount the multitude of arts without which life will not be worth living at all? Or how will be the sick be healed? What pleasure will be the ill enjoy? What conforms should we have if there were not so many arts to minister to our wants? In all these respects, the civilized life of man is far removed from the standards of the comforts of wants of the lower animals. And without the association of men, cities could not have been built or people. In consequence of city life, laws and customs were established, and then came the equitable distribution of private rights and a definite social system. Upon these institutions follow a more human spirit and consideration for others, with the result that life was better supplied with all it requires, and by giving and receiving, by mutual exchange of commodities and conveniences, we succeed in meeting our wants." So, end of the quote. Economic profit, and I'm finishing, has this only proper sense within this balanced social system of reciprocity. Either in public or in private life, individuals are expected to contribute to the collective good. Wealth and benefits are thus conceived as a collective matter, something that concerns the community and not just the individual and the res familiaris, and that needs to be submitted to check and balances. Cardinal virtues such as decorum, moderatio, modestia, continentia, and temperantia become thus essential to observe private behavior and as counterpoints of the risks and excesses associated with utilities. And I finish with the very last part of a very short quotation in which after these 3 books, Cicero and his poor son reading or listening or not at all, but because it's a dedication to Marcus, young Marcus, by then in Athens, he says, "Herewith, my son Marcus, you have a present from your father, a generous one, in my humble opinion, but its value will depend upon the spirit in which you receive it." Indeed. So this is, as we can see, value, in this case, this work is also something that is submitted to judgment, in this case, the personal judgment of Marcus. Okay, thank you very much, and really, really sorry about all these problems. I have to shorten again a little bit.